All you homeowners have unique needs. Some feel the need to paint their door a vibrant shade of blue. Others have the need to decorate their bathroom with fish, anchors, and other nautical items. And because each homeowner has unique needs, Geico helps you get the right coverage for your home and what's in it. That way, you get exactly what's right for you, even if your needs are unique. Get more with Geico. Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say ahoy or land ho and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.
Welcome back to Bloodstained Backstories. I'm your host, Jace. And today we're going to talk about a very interesting case. Imagine that you are working on an airline and you get terminated. What are you going to do? Are you going to file for unemployment? Perhaps you look for another job. Or how about this? You go on a plane, you kill the pilot and co-pilot, and cause the plane to crash and kill everybody on board. Not the option I would have picked, so let's certainly hope you don't choose that, but that is the option that David Burke chose. The only good thing that came out of this tragic event were that several laws were passed to help prevent this from happening again. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Let's hear the story of David Burke and the disaster of Flight 1771. David Burke was born on May 18th, 1952. He was born in England to Jamaican parents. The family later emigrated to the United States and he worked for U.S. Air in Rochester, New York. He was suspected of belonging to a drug smuggling ring, and cocaine was being brought from Jamaica to Rochester through the airline. Yeah, seems pretty plausible that he was part of that drug ring. Allegedly, David moved to Los Angeles so that he could avoid some suspicion, and he never was formally charged with drug smuggling. Before the events of Flight 1771, neighbors, former girlfriends, and law enforcement say that he was a violent man. He never was married, but he did have 7 children from 4 different women. Play on, playa! Now let's jump into the plane and the crew. The plane involved was a British Aerospace 146-200A, and it was powered by 4 engines. The crew was made up of Captain Greg Lindemood, who was 43, and Captain Greg had been working for the airline since 1973 and had over 11,000 flight hours under his belt, and 1,500 of those hours being on the same plane, which was Flight 1771. The first officer, James Howard Noon, was 48, and he had been with the airline since March of 1987 and had 12,000 flight hours under his belt. 300 were on the same type of aircraft. Also on board, we had 3 flight attendants. Debbie Neeson-Neal, who was 37 and had worked for the airline since 1970. Deborah Watterson-Vatsuli, 32, who worked for the airline since 1977. And Julie Gottsman, who was 20 and had been working for the airline since 1987. Pacific Southwest Airlines had recently purchased U.S. Air. And David was a ticket agent who worked for the company for 15 years when he was terminated from his employment for petty theft because he stole $70 from in-flight cocktail receipts. And let's not forget he was suspected of being part of a drug ring. The stealing of the $70 did shock his family and friends, who said David always seemed to have money. He always drove a Mercedes and owned several homes in Chile and New York. A close family friend said David had $100 bills in his pockets, like some people have pennies. David had a meeting with his manager, Ray Thomas, in an attempt to get his job back, but that failed and they decided he was not going to be rehired. David then bought a ticket on Flight 1771. The flight was a daily flight from Los Angeles International Airport to San Francisco International Airport. Ray Thompson took that flight regularly for his daily commute to work from home, and Ray was on that flight this day. David borrowed a gun from a coworker, and using his U.S. Air credentials, which had not been turned in as a way to bypass the security checkpoint. One of the lawyers who represented the two families of the people who died on the plane reported that day David gained access to the plane by going through the locked crew door. So now you must ask yourself, if the door was locked, how did he gain access? Well, it was quite simple. The access code was written above the fucking door. That was stupid. Now let's also remember this is before 9/11 and a lot of additional security measures were put in place, i.e. Not writing the access code above the door. That's as stupid as having the code be 1234 or your password to your computer being password. Anyhow, after David boarded the plane, David wrote a note on an air sickness bag, and it was intended for his ex-boss Ray, who was on the plane. The note said, "Hi Ray. I think it's sort of ironic we end up this way. I asked for some leniency from my family, remember? Well, I never got it, so you're going to get none." It was never known whether the note made it to Ray or not. Now, the precise sequence of events is undetermined, but we do know some details because of the cockpit voice recorder. Some of it was very sketchy and hard to make out, but we are able to make out some of the things that took place. The first thing that we heard is the lavatory door opening, and it is thought that David entered the lavatory to load his gun. He may have given Ray the note at that time as well. We don't know. The plane was cruising at over 22,000 feet over the central California coast, and the cockpit voice recorder recorded either the captain or the first officer asking air traffic control for reports about turbulence. And then the cockpit voice recorder picked up two high-level gunshot-like sounds, and that's when it's suspected that David shot Ray 2 times. One of the pilots reported to the controller that there had been gunshots fired aboard the aircraft. The controller asked the pilots if they wanted to divert to Monterey. They could be heard. Then we could hear the sounds of the cockpit door being opened and a female voice, and it's believed that that was the voice of flight attendant Neil. The only thing that can be made out was the word captain. And then we hear a male's voice, which could not be made definitively out to be who, but it is the word problem that was able to be heard by the FBI transcripts, and we believe that to be David's voice. The complete phrase which would have been spoken is, "I'm the problem," but the FBI could not definitively say what that was. And then immediately we hear 2 more gunshots, and then after about 6 more seconds, we hear another gunshot. And this is when David shot Neil, Lindamood, and Nunn, and they were either wounded or killed. We don't know for sure if they were fatal gunshots. Then we hear the cockpit voice recorder picking up the cockpit door opening or possibly closing, and a windscreen noise as the plane pitched and accelerated. David either pushed a control column down, forcing it to dive, or one of the pilots who was slumped against it, potentially injured or dead. And then 32 seconds after hearing the cockpit door, a 6th and final gunshot could be heard. And the only thing that could be determined is that he shot a passenger in the cabin, and it was speculated that David shot himself, but that is unlikely, since when the gun was found, a piece of David's fingertip was lodged in the trigger. This indicated that David was alive and holding the gun at the moment of impact. It is thought that the most probable victim was Douglas Arthur, who was an off-duty pilot that worked for PSA. And it was thought that he was trying to enter the cockpit to get the plane under the control and get it out of the dive that it was in. The remainder of the flight recording is sounds of the windscreen noises and some very distant voices. And at 4:16 p.m. on the Santa Rita Cattle Ranch on a hillside in Santa Lucia Mountains between Paso Robles and Quecos, the plane crashes. The plane was traveling slightly faster than the speed of sound, going approximately 770 miles when it crashed. The plane disintegrated immediately, and it was left a crater 2 feet deep and 4 feet across. And out of the passengers on the plane, only 11 of them could be recognizable and identified. Based on the discovery of the pieces of the gun and its spent 6 casings that were found, and the note that David had on the air sickness bag, it was determined that David was the cause of the crash. David was connected to the flight by a message left on his estranged girlfriend's machine and part of his body that was recovered from the crash site. After the crash of Flight 1771, we have several new laws that are passed which will help to make things better. One of those things is that after an employee is terminated, resigns, or retires, their airline and their airport credentials must be seized, so that way they are never able to flash their credentials the way that David did and gain access to things he shouldn't have. There is also a policy that has been implemented that all airline flight crew and airport employees are subject to the same security measures as passengers, which is great. That allows them a disgruntled employee to not circumvent things and those security checks that are so vital to catching and preventing things. And there are also now policies that many larger corporations have implemented that forbids multiple executives flying on the same flight, because the president of Chevron, along with 3 of the company's public affairs executives, were on board that flight and all killed. There were also 3 executives from Pacific Bell, and they were all killed. 43 passengers and crew were killed that day, all because a person was terminated for taking $70. This seems like such a waste and very sad for the families of the people on board the ill-fated flight. Let us know in the comments below what you think of both the tragic events that David Burke caused and the tragedy of Flight 1771's crash, as well as also the new things that were implemented. We'd love to hear that in the comments below. And don't forget to check us out on all your favorite social media platforms. We are on most platforms that you listen to podcasts to as well, so give us a follow. Until next week, I'm your host, Jace, and this has been another episode of Bloodstained Backstories.